Courtesy of the likes of a number of airlines over the last few months, and especially Sweet Baby Inc. over the course of this last week, many have been introduced to the realities of the political ideology of DEI. But those companies are just some of the many pushing for this. The lead cultural instigator is Disney, and they've sacrificed both Marvel, Star Wars, and Pixar on this altar. Patient zero for Disney Animation, though, was in many ways Strange World, or SJWs in Space, as it's also been referred to as. The movie that was so diverse and so inclusive that even the dog was handicapped. How could such a movie happen, and more importantly, how did its abysmal failure affect the activists within Disney? Let's find out. We're going to pull from a couple of sources here, beginning with Chapter 4 of the Defiles, courtesy of film threads Chris Gore and Alan Ng. Over the course of the Defiles, they have revealed how ideopolitical activists were empowered and overtook Disney Animation, which we have duly covered in earlier videos as well. You'll find both the original article and our earlier videos in the description. Much more detail is provided there, but to provide the briefest of summary needed to grasp what happens next. After former Disney and Pixar animation head honcho John Lasseter was Me Too'd out of the company in what had all the hallmarks of being a political hit job, he was replaced by Jennifer Lee, the Kathleen Kennedy of animation. Her philosophy, both for what happens on screen, as well as for the team's planning and bringing what happens on screen to life, is
put a chick in it, make her gay!
Jennifer Lee is first and foremost an activist, and once empowered to do so, she set about transforming Disney Animation by giving it a DEI makeover. To this end, she mandated that 50% of Disney's animators had to be female. Here's the thing though, it takes a lot of skills to be an animator, so in order to qualify to work for Disney, animators needed to be graduates from the top animation schools, such as CalArts, and even after they were hired, it would take years of mentoring under seasoned pros to really get to the top of their game. This is how Disney and Pixar stayed top dog in the competitive world of animation. By demanding that half the animators be women though, Jennifer Lee put an end to that, as there simply do not exist enough qualified female animators to meet that goal. The pool of female graduates from the likes of CalArt just isn't big enough, not because women are being kept out of the field, but because the ones who choose to pursue and gamble everything on a career in animation tend to be males, and white males at that. Unfortunately for them, being white and male makes them undecidable under DEI doctrine, no matter how qualified they may be. Rather than adjusting the goal for female representation to reality and to reflect the available pool of talent, Jennifer Lee instead stuck with the goal of 50% female animators and instead threw the qualification requirements for women out the window, and actively recruited female animators that had developed some rudimentary skill on Tumblr. And of course, only women of activist leanings were hired. Female animators with conservative sympathies were not only bypassed, but courtesy of the organization Women in Animation, blacklisted from the industry. Yeah, I know, it sounds incredible. See the earlier videos for more on that. And what about the qualified animators, freshly graduated from the likes of CalArts, who happened to be male and white males? Well, they were shit out of luck, and so were the older, more experienced animators already working for Disney, who were demeaned and bullied, and they constantly had to walk on eggshells. Because while Jennifer Lee's all-new, all-female recruits weren't trained or qualified animators, courtesy of the organization Women in Animation, they were trained in how to report your mentor to HR for the most imaginary of infractions, and how to progress your career from animation to story development. And that happened quite a lot, as these new hires couldn't actually animate to the level required. And so they were moved to story, where they got to infuse their messaging, while ever new and equally unskilled but equally activist female animators joined the company. The end result was a positively toxic work environment, turning Disney Animation into the place where magic goes to die. Okay, that maybe was a little bit more time-consuming intro than I had planned, and it's still only scratching the surface, so be sure to check out those earlier videos in the series in the description. With that, let's get into Film Thread's Chapter 4 of the Defiles, A Slow Death in a Strange World. The piece begins with establishing that where Disney Animation is concerned, Raya and the Last Dragon was the place where overt misandry and deliberate sidelining of men begun for real. The write-up reads, despite the critical acclaim, it is widely believed that the film marked the start of a downward box office trend. Though very subtle, Raya's story was infused with what many Disney naysayers consider woke storytelling as the reason for the financial spiral. This was part of a trend that permeated all of Disney's brands, including the Marvel and Star Wars franchises. The first change started way back with Ralph Breaks the Internet and its trend with the absence of a villain. Here, Raya and her squad work together to overcome and defeat a mystical force. Secondly is the portrayal of female characters as strong leaders, also known as girl bosses. Raya and Namari, both women warriors, take charge in the fight against this mysterious force. Third is the diminished role of men in Disney films. Male warriors are not exactly seen as equal or stronger fighters than the leads. According to some sources, specific measures were taken to emasculate all male characters. In Raya, no man came to her aid when she was beaten. It was either another female or the character's intestinal fortitude. Any notion to elevate a male character was directly criticized for promoting misogynistic tropes and was immediately removed. The movie underperformed, but this could be explained away by the pandemic. Next up was Encanto, but that was a John Lasseter holdover, where every major decision had already been made on his watch. The first movie that wasn't a holdover, but which really showcased Jennifer Lee and what she had done to Disney, was Strange World. About it, Film Thread writes, riding high on the success of Encanto comes Strange World. Let me be clear, me in this context being Alan Ng, many sources tell me that Jennifer Lee and her crew were incredibly optimistic about the success that would soon be Strange World, as it would be the first film with Lee's fingerprints all over it. With this new crew of activist millennials and hand-picked writers and directors in place, Strange World would be the start of DEI's new slate of socially conscientious films for children. Raya co-writer and Jennifer Lee appointee Ki Nguyen returned on his sophomore venture to both write and direct Strange World, once again under the supervision of veteran animator director Don Hall. According to Variety, under Lee's leadership, the production cost of Strange World ballooned to $180 million. It also marked new territory story-wise for Disney Animation. Of course, we already talked about the absence of a villain unless you consider climate change a villain. Now it was its environmental story that served as an allegory of our catastrophic reliance on fossil fuels. Who needs energy anyway? And everyone lived happily after. And on the way there was lots and lots and lots of LGBTQIAP+ messaging. Even more than what was infused into all other Disney projects at this time. The director spoke about the gay main character, telling Variety his gayness is one part of him. He's also bold and wildly empathetic, which is why he becomes sort of the conservationist in our film. Also, he's impulsive as teenagers kind of are, so to us, he was just a flesh and blood, well-rounded character, and I think we can't wait for the world to embrace him like we did. Except the world didn't embrace him, because the world rejected the entire movie, mostly unseen. Film Thread continues. Strange World was a complete and utter failure, and Disney executives knew it would be long before the release of the film, evidenced by the slashing of its marketing budget and modest press tour and premiere. Let's take a moment to revisit CNBC's epochal piece on the transition from Iger to Chapek and back to Iger, because they did in fact comment on Strange World there. As a primer to that, keep in mind that like all other recent Disney flops, Strange World was greenlit by Bob Iger, though it was released under Chapek. CNBC writes, board member Katz privately told Chapek he was making a huge mistake releasing the animated movie Strange World, which featured an openly gay character. Katz, who was on former President Donald Trump's transition team, told him the movie was too polarizing and not up to Disney's quality standards. She warned a poor performance wouldn't play well with the board. But Chapek and other Disney studio executives knew they'd have to release the movie. The last thing Disney needed was to anger the LGBTQ community again. Disney released the movie on November 23rd of 2022. It was a giant flop, losing Disney about $200 million. In other words, there were those in Disney that didn't want to release it at all, but they'd rather their shareholders take a $200 million loss than to stand up to the mob that Iger had enabled. And how did Jennifer Lee and the activists she filled the company with take Strange World's abject failure? Pretty well, actually, all things considered. Film Threat writes, the return to Disney animation after a very long Thanksgiving was not good. That Monday, the staff was greeted with a very glum Zoom call as a way to soothe everyone's feelings. One source tells us being Film Threat, that the Disney executive's message is essentially, this is a bummer, but the message is important, and we will press on with it. Clearly, the lesson was not learned, and Disney Animation would suffer its subsequent massive failure with Wish. And of course, nothing was learned. Jennifer Lee is not there to make magic moments, and she's not there to create value for shareholders. Or she might be on paper, but in her mind, she is there to push the message at Disney's shareholder expense, and so is everyone she hired. In my book, there is no hope for Disney while people like this roam free within the company. They still do, and at this point, and certainly in some divisions, they make up the majority of staff, and all of this has happened on Bob Iger's watch. Be sure to read the original article and catch the earlier videos in this series, all of which are linked to in the description. For now, let me know your thoughts on this in the comments.